an apology for the full meeting. Councillor Kishnadi Ralph will be partial attendance, and for lateness from Councillor Bunting.
Bubble 2 with us? Do we have to apologise?
No, we're no talk about bubbles, because that's tonight, after tonight, not yet.
Oh, heck, I thought I was my first bubbling.
Yeah, so Councillor Gallagher, you can settle down there, please. No, but
I'll be away from the meeting between 2 and 3 o'clock this afternoon.
all right, so we'll put your apologies in at that point, and I know why you're smiling. I've threatened councillors, if it looks like we're going to beat Councillor Pascoe's record, to get Blair to give an extra report. That'll extend things. Yeah. That's right. Are there any other apologies, councillors? If not, I'll move they be received. Seconded by Councillor Donovan. Just to prove he's here, he was, yep. Okay, those in favour, against, carried. Okay, councillors, on to confirmation of the agenda. Now, councillors, I'm proposing that the chair's report, be number 6. It's electronically listed down the end, but I see on the run sheet it's been put up after the minutes in its normal place. So going with the run sheet, the printed run sheet, I'll move that they be the. What, do we move that?
Yes, the agenda is accepted.
That the agenda is accepted as listed on the run sheet. Seconded by Councillor Wilson. Any other suggestions? No. Those in favour, against, carried. Thanks very much. Any conflicts of interest to declare on top of the listed ones that you have listed? Nope. There's no public forum, though I can advise. Oh, sorry.
Clarification. When we talk of conflicts, the fact of the matter is we have to register, so where we own properties, all of that stuff. So unless there's a specific item that would be related directly to, is that, yeah. So when we say conflict, we've got that list.
Yeah, that's why I just said for any that aren't on the list.
No, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good. Thank you.
Thanks. The public forum, councillors, there isn't any request for speaking at that, though I can advise councillors who are missing him that I understand Mr Stratford will be speaking at tomorrow's meeting. He has changed his focus somewhat, it seems. It's just in case you were wondering. So next item 5, councillors, confirmation of the Strategic Growth Committee minutes of the 2nd of December. I'll move they be received as a true and accurate record. Councillor Ryan seconding that. Are there any matters to raise? If not, I'll put that resolution. Those in favour, raise their hands. Against, that's carried. Thanks. Okay, we're on to item 6, the Chair's report. And I'm just going to briefly introduce that and also ask Blair to update on the process that we're following, which is there's going to be a bit of a stretched process, and he'll talk to that part of it. We had the submissions, as I say, just before Christmas, and probably the largest, well, certainly the largest number of submissions were about expansion areas for urban development, not just around Hamilton City, though most of them were. There were also quite a number going north through Waikato District. The Sleepyhead one was discussed at Ohiniwai, Pōkeno, and quite a bit of discussion about through the north there. And one of the things, my observations, if you like, it became clear that we're really talking about and future-proof 2 growth areas, Hamilton and surrounds and the south end of Auckland, and they're not, the only thing they've got in common is a sort of a legal entity through Waikato District that they're actually developing separately and have separate needs, social and economic needs, transport needs almost as well, even to the point, for example, when you're talking about the train that we have at the moment, having that not stop in the northern part, Pōkeno Tuako, but have the Pukekohe one come south to service those areas. So I think that's that's an observation about where things appear to be heading in that sort of growth area. All the other growth certainly from Huntly south and probably from Wahiniwai south at least, is really focusing on Hamilton and the greater metro area there. There are a lot of submissions from people that we've already heard around this table for the out-of-sequence growth that we've been talking about. Basically the request is essentially that, from those ones, essentially that their patches be enabled, not necessarily approved for it, but just to be listed as future urban growth areas. And one of the issues that also throws up, which we've noted around this table, is that some of them they're just asking for the bit they own to be enabled, where there are perhaps more logical, slightly larger geographical bits. An example, parts of SL1 are in next to the Hamilton City, alongside the back of Kakatea Park and the organic recycling centre, that area, and whether we look to taking the whole area out to Collins Road because it's a more logical future dividing line. Some of the stuff in the east is like that, some of the stuff in the west is like that. So there's those sorts of issues yet to be discussed exactly as well. Obviously the developers only care in a sense about their own area, but sometimes we have to take that slightly bigger picture and more common sense geographical picture, I'm thinking. So that's just a couple of observations. Blair, do you want to talk to about why we look like we're delaying? Oh, sorry. Perhaps I omitted to it because I've been introduced now. I'd like to introduce Mark Davey. What's Mark's new title? I can never keep up with these titles. City Planning Manager. Mark's been with us since before Christmas, but he's just shifted. He's a former Waikato person anyway. He's just shifted back down. Mark, would you like to say a couple of words? I should have done that right at the start, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm on, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors. Yeah, great to be here. Obviously, sort of a couple of months under the belt now. Some key pressing challenges for the city in terms of district plan, and responding to the Enabling Housing Act and things like that, which we're working through. But I mean, we'll look to bring that to the 10th of March committee. And I think we've got a workshop scheduled for the 8th of March as well to work through a whole of district plan related things. But I guess it all dovetails into what's happening in this space in terms of future proof, and what's happening with respect to Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, HUGS as well. So exciting times.
Yep. Great to have you on board, Mark. Thanks. Over to you, Blair. And then we'll throw it open to the floor. Oh, sorry, just on the process, once we've done that, I aim to have, if people want, a fairly free and open discussion about this, because it's a big topic and we want a bit of guidance before we go back into the future-proof hearings. But we don't have anything specific to put in front of you, I might add. We've got these general thrusts and issues. We will have a more specific report later, but this is to give us some initial feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. And just to welcome Mark also to this committee. It's a great pleasure to have Mark. He started just before Christmas. Mark does have some very impressive credentials, which he hasn't shared, but I'm happy to say that he has worked at Auckland Transport in a very senior role. He also worked at Waikato District Council for a couple of years, so he has extensive knowledge of their planning growth matters. And prior to that, had both a very successful commercial career and also attained a PhD in urban planning at Auckland University. So very, very excited, and the team have responded extremely well to Mark's contribution already in the short time he's been with us. So it'd be great to, as Mark understands Hamilton City Council, can really have an influential role in the matters that will come to this forum. And as Mark has said, there are 3 or 4 very big pieces of work happening at the moment, which all ultimately link into the core thrust of this particular committee and have a strong linkage with Councillor Ryan's District Plan Committee. And that is, first and foremost, responding to the government's direction on NPSUD and, of course, the RMA enabling legislation around how we think about the delivery of houses and urban dwellings in an intensified context. And so, as Mark has said, that work will come to the District Plan Committee in March, and effectively that is responding to the very clear directive pre-Christmas from government around medium density residential standards, and how we think about that in the context of our qualifying matters, in this particular instance, the vision and strategy, Te Ture Whaimana, and the implications for our Three Waters network. So that's one significant piece of work that the team are working through. And you can imagine that the link there is not only thinking about planning, but thinking about infrastructure. And Chris Allen's team are doing a lot of work to help us understand what is the state now and the future state of our Three Waters network, and the ability for that network to respond to intensification and our obligations around the Waikato River. The second part of that, as Councillor Dave has referred to, is looking longer term, both through future-proof and through our HUG strategy, to say, over the long term, where do we see growth, in what form do we see growth occurring, and how do we think about corridors, how do we think about land uses, how do we think about future areas that the city may expand into, and those include areas in our neighbouring council jurisdictions. And then interlinked with that is how do we think about the transport systems and the waters networks that support those. So there are two significant pieces of work which are in the agenda today, one of which is led by Chris Allen's team, the Metro Spatial Transport business case, which is looking at rapid and frequent transport networks and how we think about movement of vast numbers of people in means other than cars, so walking, cycling, public transport, rail, etc. And how do you overlay that with where people want to live and work, or where do we encourage people to live and work, so effectively our transport systems support that. No good having lots of intensification with no public transport to support that, because with the current rules, with no parking required, it would be a really poor outcome for the city. The other element to this is the Metro wastewater business cases around wastewater options for the south and for the north of the city in terms of wastewater plants, and how we think about growth and how we think about how we stage and fund and collaborate with our neighbouring councils on those significant wastewater investments required for the city. And I guess overshadowing all of those considerations is both Three Waters reform and the potential substantial changes around Three Waters and NTB, and of course RMA reform, which is the other topic at the moment around ultimately how future decisions around land use planning may be actually determined. And just on that particular point, and I'll put a plug in, there is a draft submission currently doing the rounds, and thank you, Councillor Ryan, for your comments overnight. That's coming to the Infrastructure Ops Committee on the 24th of February. It is our submission on the RMA reforms. So I'd encourage you to take some interest in that, and if you have a chance to look at that document, please do. So as Councillor Dave, a long story, lots of balls in the air. The team are working incredibly hard on all those at the moment, and we have worked with our future-proof colleagues to just slow down the deliberations process with future-proof, just to allow all these pieces of work to come together over the next month and a half before some quite substantial decisions need to be made at future-proof in response to these submissions. And by that I mean we need to understand what does the emerging district plan response look like, and what does that mean for where intensification may occur in the short, medium, long term. How does that link to our considerations around the medium and long term requirements for greenfield and land beyond our current greenfield boundaries, which is the emerging areas that Councillor Dave referred to? How do those requests for greenfield and emerging areas link into the work that Phil Hazelden is leading with the transport systems, and what are the core principles that we need to make sure we're 100% happy with that would ensure that those areas, if they are a potential development area in the future, respond to the types of outcomes that we want in terms of transport, in terms of climate, in terms of the type of density living, the Three Waters implications, the recreational considerations, all those things that are really important to us, value capture. So there's a lot of balls in the air at the moment, and so very grateful that Future-Proof has just slowed their process a bit, It will allow the team to engage with certainly Chair Dave and Deputy Chair Ryan as we sort of work through the various key parts before we bring that back to this meeting for your guidance and direction that Councillor Dave can then take back to the deliberations of future-proof. So lots of balls in the air, but equally I think we're coming to a position where we'll have some clarity, but we just need that little bit more time to do the work. So Councillor Dave, I'll maybe just stop there.
Yep, thanks. Look, I've got Ewan, then Sarah, then Martin in that order. Ewan, you first. And look, I'm going to be a bit loose. Doesn't have to be an exact question. We can take a few comments as well as part of this.
Sure. Thanks, Chair Dave. I just want to get a better understanding as to what is the status of a future expansion opportunity. And what I'm trying to relate that back to is you're suggesting that some of the submitters wanted that their land to be included as future expansion opportunity type area. And so I just want to clearly understand does future expansion opportunity have a status? Is there such a thing? So that's the first question.
There are some, I might just throw in a couple of general ones. There are some that we have a strategic agreement over already, WA and R2, and there are some that we're in the throes of getting that with, like perhaps SL1 with Waipa. There are some we haven't even started that sort of legal talk, and essentially they're just rural land outside the boundary, but there is a request that they be enabled, which was the word I used, which you might like to pick up from Blair, how that exactly works, which I think is where Ewan's trying to get to.
I think Councillor Wilson, and I'll try and keep this simple, I may refer to Mark or others online, but in simple terms, what the submissions are seeking is recognition in the future-proof strategy that those areas are recognised as future growth opportunities for, in this instance, the Hamilton or Metro Hamilton area. And the technical terms that sit beside those, I think that's some of the conversations that our team are having at the moment to try and get how that is recognised correct. And I'll just mention the other part of this is once future-proof the draft has been updated, that will be reflected in the Waikato Regional Council's regional policy statement. So the regional policy statement is effectively the district plan for the region. So it's really quite important we get the thinking, the language and the treatment of these areas correct so that how the regional council views them lines up with how we all collectively see them and view them.
So I have, Mr Chair, I have a number of questions. The first one I think you've answered, as in, and maybe Mark will be able to expand, but I think I've understood you to say currently you're trying to work out exactly what legal status such a status would have, and then logically what will stem from that is why would these people want that status? What does that enable them to do? And does it have a significant potential financial uplift for them simply then being included under that category?
Yeah, it's Councillor Wilson. It's paving the pathway for them through the process Blair alluded to into the RPS. So following on quite shortly after future-proof is going to be the following on after future-proof is going to be the revision to the RPS, and that's what's going to give this legislative weight. So they're wanting to start the journey now to have these areas identified in the RPS, which will give them the legislative weight in the resource management context.
Sorry, Mark, just to follow that they will then have to put in consent applications, and there'd have to be negotiations if they want to come into Hamilton City between the relevant councils, that sort of thing.
Yes, yeah, this is the start of the journey.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is the first acknowledgement that those areas of land might at some point be brought into the city, and they'll then work through a number of processes, as you allude, to be brought in.
Thank you. As a follow-up question, so from your experience, of which vast. Do you believe that would have then a immediate effect on those said properties' values, even if it's, that's the first question. Secondly, could you articulate what ongoing legal commitment then council has to enabling that? So having started that journey, have we then committed ourselves? And then the third limb to the question, that then clearly is an out-of-sequence process. What is the ramifications for all those who have followed the appropriate sequence thus far?
So the first question in terms of value uplift, yes, that's already occurring, and this will just further heighten that. The second question in terms of how we categorise these areas is out of sequence, which is the balancing act we have to go through to be very careful that we're not saying to one that we are definitely committed and going to go ahead, vice versa, discarding one saying we're not, because simply I don't think we're at that stage to be ruling things in and out yet. But yet obviously the wording and how the strategy presents these areas does start to create an organisational commitment on our part to advance these, which those developers will then leverage for us to progress.
I think, Councillor Wilson, this is where the principles come in that are critically important here. And we do have principles in the future-proof strategy and in HUGs, which are already very robust, and we're just going to make sure we relook at those because they speak to a whole range of quite substantial hurdles that any aspirant that maybe recognising these strategies has to pass to go to next phases. And I think the question you raise on value capture is a great question because we've been eminently aware of that and we're thinking a lot about value capture. And as Mark has said, there's already a lot of speculation occurring and value capture occurring anyway. And there are many tools that we are exploring to try and capture that. And some of that value capture is caught later in the piece. And this whole challenge that we're grappling with here is it's almost a catch-22. We're conscious that we want to have enough active opportunities for choice so that the market has some competition and choice. And equally, we are, as a city, striving to be a compact city, and you can look at that in various different ways, but effectively a city that's more intensified, supported by fantastic walking, cycling, public transport systems. But equally, we're also facing a housing crisis, and we need to ensure that we have a range of options in that space. So there's a number of things that we're thinking about, and then of course affordability is also in the mix. How do we pay for this? And that's
So my last question, Chair, can staff reassure me that in our thinking and our dialogue with these parties, and I accept there's a long road to navigate through with multiple hurdles, and I'm glad we've got some great minds sitting around the table because it will be in the detail that we will have to focus. Can you assure me we are putting our hat on that says we on behalf of all citizens have to make sure that we capture some land for the benefit of Hamiltonians in terms of affordable housing, in terms of sporting facilities, and that we do it early on in the early negotiations so we, the citizens, glean some of the value uptake prior to the market and the vendors enjoying all of that. I mean, if there was one entity that should enjoy some uplift, it should be council on behalf of all ratepayers, right? Because otherwise what we've seen historically is we can come in way after the fact and then we try to buy a piece of land.
Pay through the nose.
And we pay through the nose. And who's enabled it all? Us.
Yeah. Look, I'll give you the opportunity also for speaking to the thing at the end, because that's probably a good segue into a speech as well. Yeah.
Councillor Wilson, that's absolutely the core of what we're thinking about. Look, it's a complicated issue, but you're absolutely right. We have many times created the value uplift and then paid for it. And and I think Chris Allen may want to have a comment, because Chris has got a very key term, the phrase he uses whenever he sits down with developers, and it's a great one, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I'd just say you can absolutely be reassured it's at top of our mind. Whether we're successful or not is challenging, but it's certainly on top of our mind. And, you know, things we've done in the past, like Ruakura, have been great examples to follow. So I can guarantee it's on top of our mind.
Thanks, Ewan. Sarah on Zoom, thanks.
Thank you, Chair Dave. Fully endorse what Ewan has said there. I've got, Blair, you actually answered, well, you asked one of the questions I was going to ask, and that is, how is this work being informed by the mass transit work that Phil and his team is working on? Because looking further into this agenda, there's an update on that, and it's talking about, you know, us, that they're doing modelling around the emissions reduction pathway, and they're looking at what kind of form we want to encourage to, you know, reduce emissions and things. And so it seems like that work is going to be critical to informing which areas you might want to enable. And so could you, I guess, elaborate a bit more, please, on how this work is going to line up and inform deliberations?
So thank you, Sarah. So it's a great question, and I guess I'll get Mark to give some thoughts as well. But rest assured that we and I have brought all the key people together as we work through the next couple of months our thinking and findings. So Phil is very much part of the conversations with Mark and the district plan, and with Stafford and Karen on the hugs work, etc. So the teams are all communicating. What I would say, Sarah, is that we are faced with an interesting situation, Councillor Sarah, where various government directives are driving us in different directions, and we've got to try and find a middle ground, and that's part of the reason why I've sought some more time to allow us to work through all the differing directives which don't necessarily work together. And an example will be, maybe Mark wants to talk about it, the difference between MPSUD and MDRS and what it thinks about. So Mark, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so just picking up on that point in terms of MPSUD, I mean, it's really around responsive land markets and opening up land so that you're helping manage upward supply and therefore ideally the cost as well, price of land. And that's obviously a sort of a building out approach, whereas we've then landed with the MDRS, which is a building up approach. At the same time, we still have the same infrastructure deficit and same infrastructure challenges, and we haven't been provided any additional tools to remedy those. So it's a balancing act. I think in terms of looping in with the transport business case work, it's really about not foregoing any opportunities. So making sure we're not making choices or decisions now that are going to forego those opportunities in the future, and being mindful of those. So just staying very well connected.
Right. When you say forgo opportunities, what would be an example?
The obvious one is density along future corridors. So if we allow certain levels or certain types of development to progress now, we might well be foregoing those future opportunities for the optimisation of those corridors in the future. Similarly, if we're allowing large areas of growth a long way away from those transport corridors, again, we're not going to get best bang for buck out of those corridors and the investment that we make over time into them.
Because I guess a major concern for me is these developers, of course they want to get going, but they're, like Dave said, concerned about their own patch, not about the wider network and what's going to be best for the overall outcomes. And I would like to see us have a really strong emphasis on what's going to work well in terms of having people closely connected to, good quality public transport corridors and things. And we have to recognise that, someone in far north Rotorua right now is probably not going to want to bike into the CBD. So there's, the further out we go, those options are kind of closed off. So it's how do we make sure that, we are considering that, when we are looking at areas, some might be just better suited and some worse suited and going to be much more car dependent and just clog up our city even more.
Yeah.
If I could just answer that, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's two things we're doing. One is through future-proof in terms of the criteria and the principles which sit around that. The second filter, if you like, or sieve, is through HUGs and some of the sort of multi-criteria analysis which we're doing through that. I guess the challenge is that we've got a whole lot of different trade-offs which we're trying to balance. Car dependency on one hand and wanting a compact city form, and on the other hand we've got the need and demand to allow a competitive land market to help mitigate the rising costs of property.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing was just, I guess, in terms of when we look at, say, Rotokauri, there's obviously bigger challenges with the land there than, say, some other areas, around drainage and things. And there are areas where there's a lot of peat, for example, which you may or may not want to build on. So to what extent is that all being factored in when we're looking at these areas? Is that already the work that's being done through the Metro Spatial Plan?
Yes, Councillor Sarah, yes it is. And the next item on the agenda is the growth programs update, and Karen Saunders and her team can probably answer some of those more specific questions in that particular item. So, absolutely. If I could just add one comment to Mark's earlier, Councillor Sarah, the notion of any of the greenfield and emerging areas, and if they do get added into the future-proof strategy and HUGs and ultimately part of our future development strategy, coming back to those principles and I guess the notion of a compact city, those areas will have to adhere to whatever that compact city vision looks like. So you may well have an R2 or another emerging area, but it will need to be enabled by good transport systems that pick up on the Metro Spatial Plan transport principles. It needs to have consideration around Councillor Wilson's comments around value uplift and securing land for our requirements. So we, in the notion of this, the neighbourhoods and 20-minute cities will be core to those areas. It's just how we weave it all together, and that's the challenge that we're grappling with. The government's MDRS requirements pre-Christmas had removed any obligation to develop close to transport systems. It was just effectively development anywhere. So on one hand, you've got a directive through lowering vehicle emissions. On another hand, government saying houses anywhere. So we're trying to find the way through this.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. On to Martin and then Rob and Mayor Paula.
Can the Chair confirm that the City was very ably represented by Dave McPherson, who asked a lot of probing questions of the submitters?
I don't know, but an observer might be able to confirm that.
Yes, well, as the alternate's twice removed, I can confirm that. The question, and I'll just make a comment now, because once Ewan has spoken, I may come back into the debate, but...
this isn't actually a debate.
No, Look, can I just say that now with Teams technology for regional council, all of these things are live streamed, and I just, if you've got the spare moments, future-proof is absolutely where it's at for what it's worth, colleagues. I think, dare I say it, apart from the Mayor's Forum, I think this is the second most important game in the town in terms of this particular work. Question I sort of perhaps raise is, we've been talking about a compact city, but the so-called wider metro area, because obviously people, for example, if they have a plot of land and there's whole big new housing subdivisions, which I and others have been out to have a look around in Morrinsville, for example, people are going to make choices around affordability, lifestyle, etc. And Morrinsville is now joining Future-Proof at long last. what sort of work has been done around, with obviously what I'm trying to say is the significance of those towns for transport issues in terms of mode choice, mode shift, and, that sort of what I call sub-regional movement, which is surely going to increase.
Some of that's coming up later.
Yes, I wonder, Phil, did you want to?
Well, I didn't really want to.
Yeah.
There is some of that coming up in the whole report later on.
Look, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah,
the only observation
I'd prefer that we possibly touch
I'll
on later.
Oh, okay.
ask the question later.
No.
Yeah,
we'll,
sure.
We'll do it now, but I don't want to redo the same thing later.
No.
That's all.
So
Yeah.
Phil, are you able to maybe just comment at that macro level?
I think in terms of Morrinsville and other areas in the region, from a transport perspective, there will be a network solution that we bring to you as part of the MSP program business case. Now, for Morrinsville, that's probably going to be a bus-based solution, and we'll talk about why we think that's the case. We'll talk about the numbers, the patronage, the economics, and those sorts of things, and that will be the same for every other town in the region and how it links in with the future PT spines and connections into the city centre. There'll also need to be some reference, I think, in the Access Hamilton transport strategy work about how we interrelate with our sort of wider regional partners and how we align strategies and objectives and how that turns into programming and funding and all those sorts of things. So very much an ongoing conversation.
If I could just add there that I can perceive an existing problem with, and Morrinsville's a good example. I'm glad you raised it, Martin, because your solutions, you're talking about a sort of a year or two out before they'd kick in. Where the problem is now, there was big development in the Morrinsvilles and Cambridges and Te Awamutus of the world, and Ngaruawahia. Large housing estates going up very fast, and there are not yet any transport solutions, sometimes literally zero, for anything other than a car in those. And I don't know what ability we have right now to influence those, because nothing's yet captured by these future-proof and MSP work, which hasn't been finalised yet. So I'm perceiving that by the time we can start influencing the sorts of issues that Martin's talked about, we've already lost a fair bit of ground. We're talking about thousands of extra people, for instance, in Lockerbie Estate in Morrinsville, who will have trouble even getting to the Morrinsville shops without a car, let alone to Hamilton. So I'm not sure how much work staff are able to. It seems to me that every time a subdivision consent comes in any town in the Waikato, we should be trying to influence that right now, because clearly, unless it's way up north in the Pōkeno area, they're going to be having some sort of link needed to Hamilton.
And I think that's why we're now pleased that Matamatapiako has joined Futureproof after a number of attempts to get them to the table. But as you say, Councillor, the challenge is here and now in terms of some of those impacts. But equally, for Morrinsville, it's now getting them to start to think in a metro context with us, because clearly there'll be great aspirations of developers to grow Morrinsville, and it'll probably grow in a more of a greenfield as opposed to intensified nature, which is the very opposite to what we're trying to do in a Hamilton context. So those conversations with Matamatapiako will be quite important around the future-proof table. And I guess for me, this just reinforces the RRM reform and our submission to RRM reform. We're grappling with these issues and it's consuming a huge amount of our time. And we are a city thinking in a metro context. Under the reform, this could be fundamentally changed where these discussions, decisions are being taken at a regional level. And so the nuanced response for Hamilton and the future-proof area and our metro area is very different to a wider Waikato lens. And so that's why, again, what we're doing in our submission, our thinking there is important, because we're trying to shape the long-term future of a metro area with all the metro challenges and directives from government, which, as you've heard, some of which don't line up. And we're trying to find a path through the middle.
I'd make a very quick point. As long as we've got ongoing intelligence as to what happened. Because of course if we were Christchurch and Dunedin, it would be all under the one local authority, but that's another story due to the thing. But all I'm saying, it's crucial that we, in other words, if there's a major development in Tiamu to Morrinsville, Ngaruawahia, Huntly, through some reporting system, we just need to have the real-time awareness, because obviously the implications for the city are automatic.
Thanks, Martin. Rob, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Councillor Ewan mentioned the words future expansion opportunity, but I'm also a little bit concerned about those who actually want it now, rather than going on a list and are prepared to wait their sort of time. And you know, we've had presentations from developers in Wallace Road. There's one developer I've had numerous phone calls from who's south of Hamilton, and I'm sure that other councillors have had the same phone calls. And I'm sure that they're part of those 11 submissions that you reference in your chair's report. Just wondering if, you know, there's an opportunity now to look at how we might optimise the existing infrastructure that we've got, you know, the water and transport that's already there, to look at some of those areas around the city that we could potentially open up with minimal cost now rather than, or soon, rather than that putting them on lists of potential development.
Chris, did you hear Councillor Rob's question there? He was just referring to how can we optimise our waters and transport infrastructure and potentially enable some of those emerging areas earlier as opposed to putting them on the list for future development. And I think it speaks to some of the exercise that your team are doing right now on infrastructure capacity and how it links into brownfield and MDRS vis-a-vis greenfield emerging areas.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think that's the basis of HUGs and some of the trade-offs. Like we are challenged in terms of infrastructure capacity because we have this goal of higher intensification, which we've never contemplated before. So that's competing for capacity for some of these outside areas. So it'll come down to decision making by council about priority and place. So I think that's the fundamentals of HUGs and where council wants to put its energy. You know, clearly areas like R2. I won't say WA because I have a conflict of interest there, but you know, R2 we've understood for quite a while, and we have been contemplating capacity for R2, but some of these other areas, you know, we just haven't contemplated. And if there was any capacity, is it a higher priority now for intensification over a number of years and timing? So it is a complex issue, but HUGs is the right place to have those discussions rather than a random decision making, I think.
Yeah, I think Rob was talking a little bit more about identifying which parts were the water and transport infrastructure, let's say, were in place or near to being in place to allow some expansion ahead of ones where you're going to have to build new stuff, whether that's brownfield or greenfield.
And we've had developers who have come to us who have actually said, we know that there's capacity in your pipes to, you know, say in the water area, there's already capacity because we've built those water interceptors and so forth around the city, and they're saying, well, you know, the infrastructure's there. Why can't we tap in now rather than wait 10 or 15 years to do that? And what I'm trying to do is see, well, if we've got the infrastructure already there, we've paid for it, why aren't we allowing the growth to happen to utilise that? And, you know, and I know it can only be used once. You know, you can't let every developer use that same capacity, but the ones who are up and ready to go surely fit more comfortably now within the NPSUD and so forth that the central government are looking to us for.
Look, if I generalise and keep that at a simple level, developers are coming now and saying you've got capacity in your pipes, but what they're not taking account of is why we've built that capacity. We've built that capacity for our planned land use, and we've built that capacity because we've got major, for wastewater, major compliance problems where we're spilling out into the environment. So we've built that capacity to deal with our existing growth, to meet our compliance challenges and some of our planned growth. So sure, there might be capacity now, but what happens when we need the capacity for our planned growth? That's the challenge, and growth happens over a long time, so maybe it is appropriate at times to let somebody else in to take some of that planned capacity while we plan for more capacity. And a classic project in that regard is the work that Jackie Collier is leading in sub-regional wastewater treatment plants. And Peacocks, for instance, is growing and developing by borrowing capacity from our own network, but growth in that area will rely on the future Southern Waste plant in the long term, and we'll switch it back. So it's a complex issue, but the capacity we have got is for planned growth. It's not for new areas. So
Okay. Are we ever going to get to a point then where you're going to come to us and say, we talk about R2 and WA and the other little pockets of land around the circumference of the city. Are we going to get to a point where we may be able to prioritise, given the infrastructure that's there or close by, that you'll say, well, maybe, and I'll use this as an example, R2 should be the next area off the rank, because it's cost effective and economical, and all of the other ticks are in the right box that we should do that ahead of south or west or wherever of the city.
I'll look for Blair to nod to this answer, but I think that's the purpose of HUGS, to have that conversation with councillors in our community, and that would be the outcome in some degree of HUGS.
Is that therefore a priority for us to move on this faster than we currently are?
From my perspective, I think we are moving very quickly. I think there's been a lot of work happening, but it's all coming to a head over the next few months. So I think we're getting to that point where decisions will need to be made.
I think Chris has given a great answer, Councillor Rob. I mean, the whole the government's legislation pre-Christmas has been a major curveball that has come in, effectively directing all Tier 1 councils, Hamilton included, to permit intensification across all parts of the city, effectively with next to no restrictions, subject to some qualifying matters, in this case for us, the vision and strategy. So that critical work that I referred to earlier around understanding our water, wastewater, stormwater networks and capacity across the city, and that will be broken up into parts of the city, is fundamental to your question. It's also fundamental to the district plan. So effectively, in many ways, we're developing strategies, HUGs, future-proof at the highest level thinking long term, but at the same time, our response to the district plan is going to very much inform what we will be able to provide short, medium, long term because of the infrastructure considerations. And Mayor Paula has for some time been talking about infrastructure funding. This is all coming back to that same core issue. We recognise that our LTP is constrained, notwithstanding our significant investment. We recognise that there is only certain funding tools available to us to fund infrastructure. We recognise that the government is asking us to deliver a lot more outcomes, but equally to meet higher standards or higher outcomes. And then we have our own legal and other obligations around Te Ture Whaimana to not only protect but enhance the river. So that's quite a substantial consideration. So it's a very complicated challenge, and we would love to be able to say to these emerging areas, absolutely, plug in and go for it. But I think, as Chris has said, that capacity may well be also required to enable brownfield development, which we've been directed by the government to provide. So this is the next couple of months are critical as we bring all the information together to then make those recommendations back to the respective committees through both the HUGs and district plan processes.
So final question, in terms of a timetable then, we might be seeing some of these ideas start to fall and crystallise maybe around June of this year? Is that? I mean, I'm not want to pin you down to a month, but in terms of
our intention is to have the draft HUG strategy and the principles all locked down in that time frame, you know, before we have to rise as a council, and equally for the district plan that to be notified the draft in August as well. So yes.
And future-proof.
And
the future-proof, I know.
And also potentially the RPS for the regional council. So there's a number of interlinking parts here. It's ambitious, but I think Councillor Rob, we need to do it, and we need to do it in this term.
And time-wise, you don't want to have to relitigate the whole darn box and
with the new council.
With the new council,
yeah, agreed. Thank you, Chair.
Mayor Paula, thank you.
Just going off the back of some of those questions, I guess it's fair to say that all developers really most want is timing and certainty to plan a map out there what they're going to do, right? This is an interesting time because we do have some developers just outside the boundaries who have large blocks of land. My question is, if that were to deliver sooner housing yield and affordable housing yield, would that be a good thing to then push for those boundaries coming sooner? So we've got that flexibility, boundary changes coming. So we've got that flexibility. I know what you're saying about, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul, but that's already happening. We've already, in a way, through future-proof, there are winners and there are losers in terms of who's in and who's out the current growth scenario, right? I think we accept that. But at the end of the day, I guess my question is around what will deliver us the greatest yield of affordable housing, because that's the outcome I'm seeking. So, you know, how do we assess developments versus another development in terms of their readiness? Because remember, government once put shovel-ready money our way on the basis that they wanted to crack on and get people who were going to start building now, not holding land, and land has been held at incredible long time in parts of our city, right? So apropos of Ewan's questions about who gets the uplift, there's land, but the sooner we get it, and then I have got a question about, it's usual if we get the land, we put it in the city boundary, it goes up in value straight away, doesn't it, because it's city land.
There's a lot on your questions there, Mayor Paul.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. And I think some of those, I might ask Karen and Stafford to respond to some of those in the HUGs conversation, the next item. But in essence, there's value capture at various steps through the process. There's value capture occurring right now in speculation, and then there's value capture when things are signalled and strategies, etc. So it occurs all the way through. We also shouldn't forget that we have a number of opportunities within the city, within the zone greenfield areas, which we are working or pursuing right now to get away as well. So Te Awa Lakes is a good example, but equally Rotokauri, but for the stormwater swale or transport network, there's incredible developer pressure to get Rotokauri going now. We have Rotokauri Stage 2 with the MAID group. And of course we have Taino Group Holdings with the Ruakura proposal to change the zoning of the tramway block. So there are also a number of what you consider significant opportunities which but for some final funding could go quite quickly as well. So HUGs will think about all of those things. There are many balls in the air, but equally we're also needing to think about those other areas such as R2, such as WA, such as those other requests and where they sit. SL1, yes.
L1.
Yes. They're all in the mix, and the HUGs process is looking to try and put some, I guess, weighting or I guess prioritisation around those.
So my question, like Rob's, is, you know, how long in the planning and before we do the doing is the question. Sorry, I know, you know.
So
I really appreciate all you planners and the great work you do, but we've got to actually somehow get going, right?
I was just going to add Blair that, you know, some of the areas are Rotokauri, exactly like council's got obligations in my view, like they're a long way ahead in the planning continuum in terms of the land is zoned for development. There's almost obligations on council to service those, so some of those are probably closer to the start line than some of the other emerging areas as well. So,
Because in that next piece of work, I'd love to understand who's ready to go. Who could get their diggers on site within the next, 6 months and get cracking building those houses?
So Mayor Paul, I think...
There's lots of irons in the fire, but not all of them are ready.
Yeah, and so again, I'll just, if Karen's listening, maybe Karen can just, through the growth programs report, which looks at each of the different growth areas, see they can answer some of those questions. I mean, we have a number of staff working with developers to do exactly as you've asked, to get going and to try and find solutions. But again, some of the challenges are infrastructure funding gaps,
Yeah.
and so but for how we solve that, we would go faster. So
our trip to Wellington, which is in the design, I understand at the moment, I'm getting frustrated with how long things take sometimes, but however, that conversation in Wellington becomes more critical so government understands the infrastructure spend that is ahead of us to really deliver on their expectations. Because no matter what, otherwise we can only pick winners and losers and, not be more broad about it.
yeah, look, and I think Mayor Paula, and just for councillors, I think that between our staff and particularly Chris's team and through some of my group do a wonderful job trying to extend our budgetary monies to try and find creative solutions to get things underway. If we had more money, of course we could develop more areas more quickly, and we absolutely want. I think one of the things we always want is competition. We want developers to have competition pressure of other developers bringing development opportunities to the market, so we create that supply chain.
Final question from me then is, given that we can't fund all the infrastructure at all, how are we progressing with, are there any really excellent examples of private-public partnerships or private development agreements where developers have been able to help out by bringing their their funding ability to the table, and then that would give us more time, but they... Oops, I'm echoing. Do you know what I mean? Because we've talked about all these tools, and we sometimes get developers come in the room and say, well, put this land in zone, and we'll pay for the little bit of pipe from here to here, or we'll pay that for that, join that road to that road, and we'll enter into an agreement with you about that for future, for the future. Are we doing any of that? I just don't know if we are. Or I presume we are, but
yeah, I think that's the issue. That's almost table stakes that they pay for their own infrastructure. The real question is our strategic infrastructure and the plug and play and the capacity, and... I don't know what that means. What it means is, we've got treatment plants and we've got a great investment profile on treatment plants, and they're a bit agnostic to where growth is. But the big interceptor pipes that go to or from the treatment plants are our capacity constraints. So they all want to plug and this is a generalisation, plug and play and use that capacity but not offer, and they can't be expected to upgrade big strategic infrastructure like that. So how we rationalise and distribute that capacity is for council to decide.
And I think, Mayor Paula, when you're hearing feedback from developers or you're seeing developers raise questions around development agreements and species, that's as Chris said, our team's doing exactly as you've asked, trying to find solutions, trying to solve funding gaps where the infrastructure isn't there. We're trying to say, in partnership, how do we deliver this more quickly than our plans enable? And so that's right across the board.
Yeah. If I can just give one story, I don't really want to name the development, but it's an emerging area, and we've been having conversations, and they recognise it's going to be challenging to plug and play, so they're really looking at alternative options in terms of packaged plants and stuff which we've talked about a long time. So we're encouraging them to go and explore that and have a look at it. I think there's really huge consenting and other issues, but we're certainly not going to stand in their way to go and explore that. In fact, we're encouraging them to do that if they want to get going.
I'm aware of a number of that kind of thinking. Because the risk, I suppose, remains, doesn't it, that you'll get someone either doing private plan change kind of process, or the government might step in and give them a little bit of support to come on early anyway, which has happened. Because I do get a sense of frustration for some of those closest to the boundary, that they'll go directly through another route. So we can be delivered to if we don't deliver to them as well. So
I think
Dealt to.
I think though we still hold some very big cards, and I think that's why through my growth programs team we're wanting to reach out and work with these developers so that we're doing it together, not have it, my words, done to us. But of course, when we reach out and embrace them, then these conversations become very challenging, because we then start to talk about the crux of the issues, which is our aspirations of a city and what it costs to actually deliver that. And the costs, I think, are eye-watering, and for many of us, including developers, they're rapidly increasing, because the obligations and the expectations and what we see as a future city as to what we see as a city now mean that our investments are much, much larger.
yeah, and that was discussed at the metro sector, by the way, with across all the metros experiencing that increase in costs at almost every stage of development, from construction to labour to much more.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Look, something's just occurred to me about the context of some of what we're talking about. I think it was Blair or Chris mentioned current areas that are actually in place for development at the moment: Tower Lakes, Tramway Block, parts of Rotakoti. But when you look at them and know how many new residential units are coming on stream in Hamilton each year at the moment, or are needed to keep pace, Tower Lakes, for instance, would be lucky to fill 12 months worth of that. The same with the Tramway Block. Charles Mars, but which had a hearing back in November, the Rotakoti North, what might be 2 years worth. That's all we're going to get out of those, even if they all happened all at once, which they're not. And obviously there's brownfields happening as well, but that's far more fragmented than some of the greenfields. We don't have much enabled development land at the moment, so we are going to need to look at how we bring in what the best greenfields, outside the city, or that currently aren't planned. We're going to need to look at them, because even with what we've got that will fit within our current infrastructure, it ain't going to last us long. It ain't going to last us until a new waste treatment plant is built, for instance. It's not going to last that long, what we've got now. And so we're going to have something going before then. And probably I'm going to move that the Chair's report be received and seconded by Ryan. I'll put yourself on a speaking list, but I'll speak to that a little bit further. I think the value capture bits that Ewan raised at the start, those thoughts are really important that we get in early. We're already possibly too late in some ways, but that might enable one developer to come in quicker, because they are going to support us to do a partnership in terms of value capture more than others, and that can help with the whole social housing, that missing middle type of housing, all of that sort of area quite a bit, if we play our cards right in some of those deals. I also want to talk about we've got a policy at the moment of 50-50 brownfield, greenfield. We're running slightly better and have been for a few years with brownfield, but even if we were running at what some people have suggested, 70% brownfield, 30% greenfield, the way Hamilton's growing, we're going to need a lot of these greenfield coming on stream in the next 20 years, not just in a planning sense, but in a foundations going down into the ground sense. We're going to need that happening. We can't wait just because the NPSUD is saying go upwards, not outwards. It's actually harder. It's proving to develop at scale brownfield areas because they're far more fragmented. Unless you're Kaingaora and can bowl a whole suburb out at Enderley, you're just pepper potting developments around the place, and that is inevitably small bookies and seems to me less efficient and less easy to organise the infrastructure expansion needed for brownfields than it is for greenfields. So whatever we do, we're going to have more greenfield ready than we've got now, and in a way that we can afford it, or that someone can afford it. So there's some big issues there. And intensification's okay, but if you don't have the areas that you can develop that will intensify along routes, and that it's just the proverbial into the wind. It's not actually, the government can have policies all it likes, but if that doesn't actually deliver to the city affordable growth at scale, then it's not really going to help the sorts of issues that we're talking about. So we're going to have to take the lead in that area, I think, and not wait for government to pass our district plan. Hugs and that is going to have to be enabled in the next few months, or sorted in the next few months, so that we can actually crack on and start saying yes or no to people, and or yes, and this is the year it's going to happen, and sort of thing, which I think is a point that Rob made and Paula made, that we need to start providing that sort of timeline and certainty. So those are just a few thoughts of mine. We've got a speaking order. Ryan's next, then Ewan.
Yeah, look, just listening to everyone's conversations and talks, apologies, I had to step out for a little bit if I missed some things there. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of conclude with some support for, the conversation and where we're at, and I guess some context with my hats on. I think earlier on, Chair Dave, you talked about extending the boundaries out to Collins Road and those sorts of sensible things. I support that sort of thinking. I think we need to be really ambitious and have a 100-year type of thinking. I think this is part of the challenge that councils have had, and why government's now forcing our hand in terms of reform, because the councils are thinking too small and too localised and patriarchal. So I think we need to be bold in our vision and strategy there. I just want to remind councillors of the HUGS principles, because a lot of these questions were raised, and I want to, I guess, give some confidence that these are top of mind in the HUGS process, and there's still a lot of touch points for us as elected members. But just really quickly, 15-minute neighbourhoods, compact and accessible developments, affordable housing, sustainable and integrated infrastructure solutions, a significant portion of land value uplift for the benefit of the wider community, places to work, quality connections, places for recreation, enhancing economy, recognising cultural heritage, climate change, biodiversity, and the last one there, meeting the costs of all infrastructure. So as much as we can legally, as far as the DC models go, we're really going to shift the bar in terms of putting the acid test on developers to come to the table. And I think you touched on it earlier, I don't think historically we've done that very well. And I think now the bar is getting lifted very high in terms of value uplift and infrastructure requirements. And I guess the most recent thing with the MDRS, and it's forced our hand in terms of intensification. The golden egg we've got out of it is the Tūturi Whaimana qualifying matter, and staff are working on that as we speak to develop, and I don't know if it was touched on, the traffic light thing, to understand acutely the capacity of our infrastructure, the arterial and the headwork infrastructure across our city, and that's going to come out within the next few weeks. And we will have probably, my view is one of the best infrastructure analysis updates in the country in terms of councils, which will give us a traffic light red, orange, green in terms of where we can accommodate more brownfield development, or where, to Rob's point, it's going to be more suitable for accommodating emerging greenfields areas. So that detail is coming, and that's going to really, really be fantastic. And the other thing, of course, which we're exploring, we've got rates, we've got DCs, is financial contributions. I know staff are really looking at that as a model to explore. And I think we're also going to see more ifs in terms of targeted land charges to ratepayers, and we're going to have a lot more money, people wanting to invest in infrastructure, $50 million sums, where big superannuation entities are going to invest in infrastructure, and there'll be a targeted rate for those homeowners for the future. I think we're going to see more of that across New Zealand. All of this to say is all these aspects that Blair and Dave have touched on, district plan hugs, are all coming together, and I think it's a really exciting opportunity to be a councillor, and all your feedback and input into this is going to be something pretty special for our city and region.
Thanks, Ron. Ewan, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Dave, and thanks for your report. Over the last couple of years, I've spoken often in this chamber about the importance to go up rather than go out. And I've spoken as to why I've held that position, and that's mostly been about protecting the land that we have that is better purposed for farming and agricultural use, and trying to leverage off the whole premise of a 20-minute city compacted. I must confess, in the last 12 months, my thinking has evolved slightly. And I've suddenly realised that, in fact, it needs to be a combined both out and up. And I reflect on the fact, prior to, obviously, Kerikeri Roa being established by a number of hapus, you know, the city of Hamilton in 1864, I wondered if they ever visualised a city of 170-odd thousand that we have here now. But I think, going to Councillor Ryan's point, we're at a pivotal moment when we now need to start thinking about a city of 360,000 people. And I don't think it's going to take us 150 years to get there. I think we're going to get there much quicker. And I don't think we need to be fearful of that growth. In fact, I think we're in this unique position of being able to look at this as a wonderful opportunity, and it's incredibly exciting that the fact that that this city is growing so rapidly, and the market shows that there's constant demand. And I think if the pandemic has shown us anything, that demand's likely to increase. You know, New Zealand's a great place to be. So here's my point. I have total faith that our staff are capable and are motivated by the right reasons, and I think we've got some very capable elected members who are driving an important conclusion that is at our doorstep. We're having to make some critical decisions, and I think those decisions are up and out. I think they are about a city of 360,000 people. And I think we have to land on a growth principle and policy that is just and fair. And I think that means that developers, by the very nature, have to share the burden of cost. And I think it's appropriate that Hamilton ratepayers and citizens, both now and future, benefit from us trying to get value uplift now, and so that we protect ourselves. So I've run out of time, but I think there's a real opportunity, and I look forward to working with you all and ensuring we position ourselves to implement a growth strategy and policy that we can all be proud of.
Thanks, Ewan. Mayor Paul, thanks.
Thank you. What is growth really all about at the end of the day? It's about houses, home people and communities. That's what it's about. So the bottom line for me is how quickly can we get homes built with a high proportion of affordability? Because just last week we heard how New Zealand, and our averages aren't always very useful, but New Zealand has become $1 million home place. You know, and there's only a few parts in the country where that doesn't exist. So we should be bold. I take up on Ryan's points. We've got to be strategic, but we've got to be bold. Well, we can't actually rely on ratepayers to fund this future growth. That is plainly impossible. It's just impossible. But developers can't meet all the costs either. Their costs are going up, but I do believe they can partner with us and leverage funding that we can't through, you know, the ways that Ryan was talking about, different models of recouping funding. They often can tap into bigger banks and have bigger debt capacity than we do, because remember, we are also constrained by our debt capacity. what concerns me at the moment is while we talk about reform, we're doing reform in very siloed ways, and that's not council's fault, it's just the way it's happening. We've got waters, 3 waters, we've got RMA, we've got the housing bill, we've even got the CDEM, we've got untold local government reform in general, all coming in one big slam down moment. This has got to have been one of the busiest 2 years in my 20 years of local government experience. I see you nodding, Blair. It's just absolutely madness. When I go on these various Zoom calls with Metro Sector, with the other mayors, with the local government members, and we start talking about this bit or that bit, I remind them, and I keep reminding them, the elephant in the room for all of this is infrastructure. The elephant in the room for New Zealand to go ahead is infrastructure. We need the government to come to the party for infrastructure if we're to build the sort of New Zealand that we have to build to be a modern, thriving country. And just make a point also in support of Sarah. At this time that we are building, we need to lean on developers and parts of our community to do better around climate matters, around transportation, etc. And I'm interested in the Hugs conversation that we're having next to explore some of those levers, because Sarah and I have talked about grey water recycling, we've talked about rainwater tanks. This council has been a strong advocate for mode shift, etc. So how do we move into that space? And I suspect that if developers really want to open up their piece of land and do something, we may have some levers to up the ante there on those sort of things. And if we don't, I'm going to be leaning on the district plan review through Ryan's great work to say there's some things we've got to do differently in the future there too. Cheers, thanks.
Thanks, Paula. Councillor Rob, thanks.
Yes.
Councillor Martin keeps slipping off there. Must be something wrong with his button. He keeps going up and then coming off.
I share some of Mayor Paula's concerns around the cost of this infrastructure. And particularly in areas around the city where we haven't got the infrastructure and would need to take it there. And I think Collins Road may be a pretty expensive area to provide infrastructure to, certainly if we don't get or go ahead with the Southern Wastewater Plant, or it's many, many years in the making. I think we remain very constrained financially. Our model is such that it becomes harder and harder for us to find the money to fund the infrastructure in a way that will suit most of the developers. And that constraint, if we adopt a scattergun approach to funding infrastructure around parts of the city, may put pressure on us. I thought Chris Allen made a very pertinent comment around our existing commitments and contracts that we have in Rotokauri, and I think we also have in Peacock, that we can't just simply ignore those in favour of trying to find particular areas. And I think the comment about targeted rates and Crown Infrastructure Partners infrastructure funding, while useful, is not on its own a silver bullet. It does bring further debt into our community, and our residents will ultimately end up paying for it, maybe in a different way to rates, but it will still be a debt within the community. And whether or not that reflects in land prices, in my mind, remains to be seen. I think the recent suggestion by the Deputy Prime Minister that residents in Auckland should all, around where the light rail's going, should all pay $1,000 per section per year, has created quite a stir in terms of how the central government thinks they might fund that. And I think it brings back to home that very reasoning that if it's coming out of another pocket and going to another government agency, it still is a debt in the community, although not necessarily one that council will say it's part of your rates. So I think we do need a long a long discussion, and I think Mayor Paula's continued work with the Metro councils and with central government around our whole funding structure does need close scrutiny, and we need to be putting pressure on central government to find alternative ways or additional ways in which councils can be funded in this area. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm going to lock in Councillor Gallagher to speak before his button goes off again, and then Sarah after him. Thanks.
No, sorry, I think the contributions have been excellent. I still get really irritated with the stupid 3 minute. So how you can explain how Councillor Hamilton, he did well, can explain the huge challenges in 3 minutes. I think that's dumbing down, frankly, debate and discussion. I am very irritable with that. I think this is...
You've used up 1 minute already.
Well, I'm deliberately going to do it. I'm looking at the time. I can, but the fact that, seriously, I mean, as long as we actually don't for the sake of brevity, and I know we need that, but the huge issues in front of us, sense of Groundhog Day to a degree, but obviously I think the contributions from all of you have been incredible, and can we do whatever we can to get progress before for the incoming council? The more work this council can do, obviously, the better. And I will say, and this is just my own internal observation for here, I think around this table, both in terms of our staff team and around this governance table, some really good intellectual grunt and foresight. I think there's some really good work done, frankly. I will just close off with my homily around we are the 4th largest metro in the land and the 3rd smallest after Karau and Napier, is that right, in terms of land area? And I do look forward probably in the hugs, around that boundaries discussion. So if we think we need, let's get on and, sort those boundaries out as much as possible. Thank you. But great work being done.
Thank you, Marty. That was less than 2 minutes. Well done. Councillor Sarah, thanks.
Thanks, Chair Dave. I think we have an incredibly difficult task in front of us, balancing a housing crisis and at the same time an environmental crisis, and trying to hit the right spot there, I can understand, is really hard. I think in terms of looking at areas to enable and looking at when we enable them, it is really critical that we're ensuring that these new developments are going to support a transport system that's sustainable for the long run. And, it's not only carbon emissions that we need to be thinking really hard about right now because our window of time is very small, but also even the capacity for people to get around our city. We know that within next decade or so, we will run out of capacity for people to get into the central city unless we're giving people other options and choices. So that's really critical, and it's also not only critical for developments that will be within our boundary, but also happening around us. And Councillor Davis or Chair Davis already alluded to a number of those developments which are not in surrounding towns, which are not helpful in terms of our aspirations for our own transport system here. We also, I agree with Councillor Ryan around taking a long-term view, and yes, we do need to be looking at options for building up and outwards in a sustainable way. I do disagree somewhat with Chair Dave around his comments around intensification and not being able to happen at scale. While one development might not be at a large scale, actually we can already see that intensification is able to happen at scale simply by the fact that around half of the buildings going up and building consents being issued are for urban regeneration, for infill. And that is going to be enabled even more with a lot more sections now being more subdividable, more suited to development. And with being able to build a lot more on a section, it's going to be a lot more economic. So what we really need to do is now look at how do we deal with that challenge, and maybe it will mean more frequent bus routes throughout the city to reach more people, because we have that we have more intensification being spread across the city. And that's the kind of advice that I'll be looking for in terms of ensuring that we can still deliver quality outcomes. In terms of the cost of infrastructure, I really think it's unrealistic that we can expect developers to deliver meet the whole cost of infrastructure. And ultimately, we're passing the upfront cost onto home buyers, who then pay for that through their mortgages, or opposed to, say, our local central government borrowing money and spreading this cost out over a longer period, and doing what we should have been doing decades ago, which is providing a lot more capacity for that population growth and for our future generations to have a chance of home ownership, or at least having a good place over their heads. So I think that I really support the work that's happening around finding other options for funding infrastructure, but I really think we can't just put it all on developers, because otherwise we won't get the that extra capacity that we're looking for. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Mark 1.
Kia ora, thanks, Dave. Kia ora te whānau. Yeah, look, thank you for the great work. I just want to talk all the fantastic stuff that Blair and the team and Ryan and you guys are doing with the district plan stuff. There are massive challenges. And I echo the calls that Rob was making for alternative funding. It's something we've known for a long time. The rates model at present is insufficient for what's required of us. I'm concerned the more we verbalise that, though, that is all this government will hear. And as we've seen with Three Waters, they're very quick to paint all local councils as incompetent. And the more they hear we can't afford it, the more they may see that centralisation is the only solution. So that's my only political worry with this. And I think the way around is the way that we're going. Bomb them with positive plans, bomb them with positive leadership locally. Show them that this can be done, which I believe that Blair and your team are best equipped in the country to do. There's an old saying, it's if you don't have a plan, you're going to be a part of someone else's. So I think the further ahead you guys can forge with this, or we can forge as a council with this, the very better and the stronger we'll be. I'd also suggest, I'm along with Sarah as well, that we pay massive heed to how these people are going to get around. We need to be constantly being brave enough to give ourselves an uppercut and say, look, maybe buses aren't the answer, maybe more cycleways, maybe easier carways are the answer. We've just got to constantly be reviewing that, but that's around the fringes. I disagree with Sarah that people don't cycle from Northern Road to turn into the central city, because I know I do for one, and I know a lot of school kids do for another. So, but that's again, fringe. All I want to do is say, well done, keep it up. Glad to throw a shoulder in where necessary, but I think we're on the right path.
Thanks, Bunty. That looks like everyone on the list. Just a couple of wrap-up points here. Look, there is a wild card in the terms of funding infrastructure that we have only just touched on, and that is whatever Three Waters entity we end up with is highly likely to have to need an investment plan itself. It'll initially take on board our LTP investment plan, but that's only short, medium term at best. It doesn't even include all the funding needed, much of the funding needed, for instance, for the second wastewater treatment plant. So they're going to have to, that entity is going to have to find a way of funding that, which may have two sort of infrastructure pictures going on at once, our own one and the Three Waters one covering this area, and our challenge there is probably going to be to make sure it synchronises with what the city and other communities actually need. So the decision-making process there is going to be quite important coming up in the near future. I think, Sarah, you probably slightly misunderstood me. I support greater intensification. I'm just making the point that because it's fragmented, it is sometimes more difficult, especially to put the infrastructure needed to support that in the right place. And with the best will in the world, it won't be the answer to all our growth needs. So maximise it, we should be doing, but be aware that we have to have something else as well, which gets you to Ewan's point. I'm glad he's sort of changed his mind, as he said, a little bit, because it is about the right balance. It's all in the balance, as a certain election candidate said 2.5 years ago, and about a few years before that probably as well. You got to get the balance right. But no, seriously, that's something we've worked on, and I think the government needs to be aware, and we have said it to them, but be reminded that we're doing better in terms of that balance of intensification / brownfields and greenfields, probably better than, we're certainly doing better proportionally than any other metro in the country. I've heard of one or two cities in the 20% brownfield development when we're in the 55% sort of area there. Ewan made the point that we had 170,000, it's actually 180,000 technically now, but in reality, we did a count the other day, we're just over 300,000 in the metro spatial area, and that brings up the point that Martin's raised in the past. It probably, a brave government and a brave council might start advocating for one city covering the metro spatial plan area, and that's a population already of over 300,000, so we're nearly at your 360,000, Ewan. You're being far too conservative. Be bold, go for 500,000, because seriously, that's what we're looking at in the 30 to 50 year horizon, I suggest, at trying to accommodate and plan for. Thanks. So we'll go to the vote just on receiving the report. Those in favour, raise their hands. Against, thanks, it's carried. Let's break until 20 past. We're going to come back sharp then, ready to go. councillors. Thank you. We've got the growth programs and HUGs review update, item 7, and Karen Saunders is going to lead off on that. And Karen's online. Yes, you are.
I am. Kia ora. Thank you, Dave. Morena, everybody. And thank you for the discussion earlier about the growth of the city. I think it's been really helpful and informative for our teams to hear that and inform the work we're doing on HUGs. So I guess this particular report is it's almost like a two-part mini-series. We've got an update on HUGs and then also an update on the delivery aspect of what's happening in the growth programs areas. And I wonder, Chair Dave, if it makes sense to just sort of focus a little bit on HUGs and then go into the growth programs updates.
Sounds good. Yep, thanks.
Cool. So just following on from the good conversation that was being held before. So HUGs, Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, is our, I guess, our strategy for when and where the city will grow in the next 50 years. And as the team are doing this work, we're thinking, how can we grow in a way that protects what the communities value? And I guess last year has been quite challenging with all the changes that came through from the government, etc. But it's feeling a little bit more certain now with a clearer runway. And so Stafford will provide you an update. The team have been focused on alignment, particularly across those projects, the future-proof review, the district plan review, the strategic work happening with the transport and waters business cases. So we're keeping all that top of mind. And the other approach that we're taking is we're keeping in mind what the market is doing and what developers are doing. But for us, we like to think of the 3 circles, or 4 even, which is focusing on the infrastructure, building and financing, and the land use elements, and sort of wrapping that around in terms of what outcomes can we get that are good. So rest assured that you will have a significant amount of engagement over the coming months as this work ramps up, and the decisions that you'll be making about where the city grows and what to do with those emerging areas will be happening very soon. So before I pass over to Stafford, I'll just do a brief intro on the growth programs updates as well, and introduce a new member of my team. So I finally have a full team, which is really great. I'd just like to introduce Sonia Baker. Well, I think you can see there on the screen. Sonia has picked up the program management of the Peacock and Rotokauri Northwest areas. Started late last year and just coming up to speed with everything in those areas. So welcome, Sonia.
Kia ora. Thanks, Karen.
And so just very briefly on the growth programs element. So again, even in all of these uncertain times, I'm sure you can see from the growth programs update reports that are attached that there's a really huge amount of good work that's going on in terms of delivering the growth programs. And so what we'll do is we'll just open it up to any questions that the elected members have after we talk about HUGs. And I've got the growth programs managers online here, and I believe that they have their growth programs, or all the technical teams ready and waiting to answer any questions you've got about what's happening in those growth areas. So I will pass it over to Stafford to provide an update on HUGs.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you for your good discussion this morning, councillors. That's been really helpful. I think one thing I heard, and I'd like to re-articulate, is that HUGs is a strategy which must consider trade-offs. So I think a few were touched on today, but particularly there's a trade-off between emissions reduction and compact urban form, compared with readiness to proceed rapidly and overall land supply to mitigate housing unaffordability. So that's a really tough one that we will have to grapple with through this strategy review. And we have to get the balance right, and this we'll only find out how right we got it over time. So it's a really tough space to be in. This balancing act needs to be owned by council, but we won't be successful unless we're supported by our partners, including developers, iwi, government and government agencies. So it's a hard group to get on the same page sometimes, but we've been working on technical evidence basis, which will be a really important starting point to inform this balancing act. We need a shared position over some facts to use as building blocks for our strategy, and then we can inform some really good discussions with our partners to come to that balancing act and get them to understand our point of view and the different conflicting ideas that we need to balance. So staff have proceeded with working on this technical evidence basis to support HUGs cross-council. This has been a real challenge with all the interrelated moving parts, which the committee had a thorough discussion on before the break. We've got a pathway forward now. To achieve this, HUGs in the district plan need to run in parallel. This means that the proposed HUGs will be ready for consultation in July, as the district plan change is notified in August 2022. At the next HUGs reference group, staff are looking forward to having a discussion on some of the initial outputs of this technical work, and to get a steer from elected members on the reference group there as to the direction that they would like staff to take with the HUGs review. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Right. I know, Sarah, that you had some questions you signalled to me. Are you still wanting to ask them at this point?
Sorry. Yes, it wasn't regarding HUGs specifically, but just more the new growth areas. And I've raised this a number of times before, but I'm still not confident that I've got an answer. And it was just around the lead infrastructure that we're putting in now is getting better and better around people, multiple choices for how they get around. But the infrastructure developers are putting in isn't necessarily supporting that multimodal transport system. And so I'm just wondering, how are we making sure that things are put in right the first time around? And I know that we've got the RIPs, we've got structure plans and things, but I'm not totally convinced that we've got the right requirements in place right now to ensure all the good outcomes from the developer-led infrastructure.
So would you be talking about the HUGs principles having some key implementation things that have to be in development proposals that come before us for us to even look at them? Is that the sort of thing?
Well, it's probably relevant, maybe it's relevant to HUGs, but it's also relevant to places that already open now, like Peacock and Rototuna. So I guess I'm just asking for a way, maybe a conversation offline to start with, to understand, to have, infrastructure and growth staff together and just understand, have a clear picture of what we're doing to ensure that developer-led infrastructure is delivering the right level of service for different users. And if we're not quite hitting that nail on the head right now, then just to understand what we would need to do further to do that.
Okay. So that's both a HUGs and a general sort of development question.
Yes.
And perhaps Stafford and Karen, you might like to sort of address that. It's not specific to any one area.
Thank you, Chair Dave. Yes, Sarah, it is a difficult area to operate in, and I think with these difficult areas, it requires a cross-council response. So HUGs is definitely part of the answer here. Through our draft out-of-boundary principles, we need to be focused on that good design outcome. When we're talking about urban design at that level, we're talking about how you master plan an area so you can get these outcomes. And I think what we're seeing, well, definitely one of my observations in the way that Hamilton has developed over the last 10 years is a rapid change in how we go about greenfield development. So I just think back to the likes of Rototuna when it started off and the types of sections that were there, and you see a radical transformation to Rototuna now, and just considering things like accessibility across areas of the community that would have been segregated by, say, the expressway is a good example, and then now thinking towards Peacock with the large amounts of green space and innovative ideas like bikes on pikes, which are really taking steps in the right direction. But I think through Hugs we can help this with these principles, and opportunities like the refresh of Access Hamilton will provide a really good direction for a pathway forward. So I think we just need to be keeping these types of good design and outcome focused principles at the forefront of all the things we do, because if we do it in one area, I don't think it's good enough.
Thanks, Stafford. I'm just thinking, because I agree, it comes across multiple areas of work. I know that some work's happening around design guidelines, and then that feeds into the regional infrastructure technical specifications. But that work's been pretty slow, I understand, because of a lack of capacity and things. So would it be possible for us to say, have an action or maybe a report, just a section in the General Manager's report for the next growth strategy meeting or infrastructure meeting where we're able to just outline how the pieces fit together and what more we need to do there. So I'm just thinking or a meeting of relevant staff come together from the different areas to really look at this issue, because it's something I've raised probably for a couple of years now, and I'm just keen to make some progress in being really clear that what we're doing.
Blair.
Yeah, look, I just wonder, Councillor Sarah, what you've asked almost speaks to what Karen is leading with the growth programs team. So happy to elaborate that further. But Karen, maybe just talk about the role of your program managers, because it does speak to what Sarah's asking about.
Yeah, so Councillor Sarah, now that the full team's on board, we will start to see more of that, even more of that outcomes whole of community approach, similar to what we see in Peacock. And because obviously it's city development who plays a role in here, infrastructure operations as well as growth and planning. So the program manager's role is to weave together all of those people and the projects that we're doing and the thinking that we're doing for the future to make sure that we're delivering those good outcomes.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Paul.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Thanks.
In terms of the comments, Stafford, you made around the climate balancing act between delivering, carbon reduction in carbon for new developments, infill versus new greenfields is part of the issue there, the balancing act. Is there a way we can signal doing things differently that you in greenfields, brownfields areas that is more climate friendly? I know that, for example, in Peacock, we're planting hundreds of thousands of trees in total, but 17,000 trees in the first swathe, right, through the Mangaka-Tukutuku Gully catchment. So what else can we do? Where does it sit with not just the where but the why of the what of development? How do we incentivise developers to build climate-friendly solutions? I know Sarah and I have had some conversations with green building companies before and green homes and so on, and they've got a lot of initiatives that can actually build climate-friendly suburbs.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the conversation, therefore. There obviously a greenfield development that promotes mode shift would be the way forward from now, as opposed to promoting greenfield developments that rely heavily on private vehicles to get around. And also I think that 20-minute city, 15-minute neighbourhood idea is really key to helping communities meet their daily needs where they live. So this type of greenfield development will be significantly better for the environment than sort of a traditional way of doing things maybe 20 years ago. So I think we're already by default one step forward here, but there is just still significant environmental considerations to expanding out. So these are some of the discussions that will come up in the future through the reference group and then brought through to the Strategic Growth Committee, where more specifics on this balancing act will come up.
So can I also, oh goodness, sorry. Can I also ask about sustainable water use, smart energy homes and all of that, that we signal somewhere, you know, an intent to embrace those kinds of thinking, where the right place to embrace that kind of thinking would be, because it's much more expensive to retrofit than to build into the design. You know, we've got grey water recycling, rainwater ponds, all sorts of things like that, you know, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'd love to understand how we at least give that space on paper so people are having the conversations. The other area is a question I have is basically off the back of the comments I made in the Chair's report around the emerging areas versus the already planned for areas, but versus the CBD. When we could see the kind of yield that might be developed within those versus the readiness of developers to do that. Does that make sense? Because there's lots of, it seems like we're a city that's rich in opportunity, but that doesn't mean we're keeping pace with demand right now. So who's ready to go where is basically what I want to understand. So, and just the ability to be flexible. I do believe strongly in our strategic planning, don't get me wrong, so don't take it any other way, but we need to be able to flex towards the best opportunities where, because the housing is a crisis, it's a crisis, and, you know, we're sort of doing one step forward, two steps back occasionally, sometimes two steps forward, one step back, but we're not quite where we need to be, right? And, you know, election year this year, we'll all be talking about woe is housing, but we talked about that 3 years ago as well.
To the first part of your question, HUGS is more around focusing on that capacity and uptake and making sure that we have a plentiful supply of land for growth. It's less about the rules around what can be developed in certain areas. There's definitely a strong linkage there, but I think maybe some of the Green Home Initiative ideas might be better suited through other avenues and policies.
Can you tell me which avenues?
Yep.
Because words are power, right?
Yeah, Mayor Paul, if I could just jump in there. Thanks, Stafford. So we're looking at that through the district plan review, and particularly in the context of Te Ture Whaimana and how we give effect to that. And I guess it's in this context of urban intensification and transformation of our urban environments from, you know, traditionally 15 dwellings per hectare through to, you know, 30 to 40 dwellings per hectare. And so we're looking at a whole lot of additional provisions, which we'll talk to you about on the 8th of March, in that space in terms of water.
Yeah, so Te Ture Whaimana, and of course I know that very well, is a good lever, but at the same time, there is so much more that can be achieved when you take a climate first lens. I'm not saying we go all out, but I'm saying that we make tangible steps. I know Sarah and Martin will be presenting at some stage, it's not quite ready, the climate strategy and the climate action plan. And what I don't want to see is siloed thinking. So across the documents, and this HUGS report looks really nice, the document behind it. I'm just saying that words are quite powerful. If you signal where you want to go, it's helpful. Yeah. And why wouldn't you? You've got other issues out of it. It's a principle I'm trying to capture, Stafford, not necessarily the action. And I think it could be captured to a greater extent.
I really like our draft out-of-boundary development principles for signalling how we want development to proceed. These are the guiding principles of discussions we'll take with those emerging areas about being good growth for the city. And I think even though they're targeted at those emerging areas, they really are setting the tone for the type of development we want in Hamilton total. So I think that that's an appropriate place to capture some of these environmental considerations that we want to reflect in our city.
My personal view is that it should be across all areas, not just emerging, but...
Yeah, well, that's what he's just said. It'll set the tone for the whole lot.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I think, Mayor Paula, this is why we have slowed down hugs. We have sought to slow down future-proof, to allow district plan to catch up. And everything's interlinked. And I think you said it well earlier. There is so much going on at the moment. The key for me is that all our teams are joining up all the various themes. So we're consistent in terms of what we come forward with. So the district plan fits nicely as part of enabling the hugs, that future-proof and hugs and district plan all aligned, and they pick up the climate environment committee's work and thinking around the climate plan, etc. So yes, we're working really, really hard to join up all those various themes in the time we have.
Okay, thanks. Rob, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, my first set of questions are around paragraphs 21 to 26. And I see the questions are quite interdependent, so I'm not sure which question comes first, but I'll have a go anyway. Obviously, and this follows on from Mayor Paula's question and Blair's response, we obviously have got a very tight time frame now, and are staff confident that we can get consistent thinking around, a July date for hugs and then a district plan notification in August, given the complexities that we know are already in both those documents and the NPSUD, which kind of cuts through it like a sabre, I think.
I think, Rob, we definitely can get aligned thinking. And I think some of the benefit of the timing that we have now is that we can set it down this year, but we'll be aware of changes that are continuing over past that July date, that notification of the district plan in August. There'll be changes to Three Waters and local government reform, and we can circle back around and review hugs on a more regular basis. We really need to set down review of hugs this year to help inform our next LTP and to be aligned with the district plan change. But in saying that, there'll be opportunities that we will progress further, perhaps in emerging areas or through partnerships with Kia Ora, that then will need to reflect back into hugs in a 3-yearly review cycle. So I think what I would like to say about the hugs review now is that we'll use the best information available, and it will line up with the other work that we are progressing at the time, including the Metro Spatial Plan, the District Plan Review, the review of future-proof strategy, and then in a subsequent review we can pick up anything that we progress subsequent to landing this review of hugs.
Okay, just in terms of paragraph 21, we talk about the NPSUD as telling us that, it perhaps does result in us having a lack of flexibility in terms of how we might craft not only hugs but also the district plan. I understood that there was some flexibility in NPSUD, and assuming that's still to be the case, are we making sure that that flexibility available to us will be crafted into the district plan in a way that serves Hamilton better than the broad brush approach of NPSUD?
Perhaps a question for Mark.
Yeah, so Councillor, that's what we're working on, and that's what we're going to bring you some initial thinking on the 8th of March and then follow up on the 10th of March DP committee. So we are looking at ways to nuance the response in Hamilton, in terms of NPSUD and MDRS provisions.
Okay.
Councillor Hamilton for Hamilton, who's the chair, is going to...
Yeah.
This would be helpful, and Mark Blair could correct me. There's some elements now with time and resource that we won't be able to fit into the district plan July, but I understand we can roll them over. There'll be some successive rollovers. Could you speak to that maybe?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think so. Overarching all this, district plan's roughly a 10-year planning document. HUGS is looking at a much longer time horizon than that. So I think that's the first point on that. And yeah, what was the second part of the question?
Some of the district plan stuff will be folded into the new year.
Yeah, so I think the other, thanks. So the other component to that is this is not a full district plan review. We are changing the district plan, varying the district plan based on the legislation that's coming at us. So where we can, we'll make, within the sort of framework of the legislation, we'll accommodate what we can, but that won't cover everything.
So the suggestion about the notification in paragraph 23 in August of the district plan is not really a full notification. It'll be, what you're saying, Mark, is that it will be a notification of what we are obliged to do under the government directive.
Yeah, yeah.
But we've still got a chance to continue notifying changes.
Absolutely, yeah. So effectively, what we're looking at in August, there's two streams. One is a stream in terms of changes to the plan, which are as a result of the changes in government legislation, so MDRS, MPSUD. There's a second stream which we'll look to notify around the same time, which is work in the heritage space, work around SNAs and things like that. But that's not precluding plan changes later on this year and early next year to do other things like Tarapa North Industrial and a number of other things which are in the pipeline.
Rob, we approved that sort of partial review, if you like, quite a few months ago because it was obvious we couldn't do the complete review.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And we went through the steps as to whether that would confuse the marketplace.
We discussed the options of that, yeah.
Okay, and the confusion around objections to the plan.
Well, we'll be bringing you an updated work program on the 10th of March, and we can sort of nut those things out then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. I've overlooked that. And just one last question on that particular area, which I think is covered off in paragraphs 25 and 26, which is about working with the surrounding TAs and other government agencies. Are you confident that we can manage that given the different agendas, financial and political, in terms of that time frame that we've got, or do you think that some of that will flow through to the subsequent notifications?
So that's specifically in regards to district plan?
Yeah. District plan and also HUGS too.
Yeah, so on the district plan point, I guess we're actively working with Waikato and Waipa in terms of what a Hamilton nuanced response looks like. Yep. So we obviously the aim there is to have alignment. So the future-proof councils are coming out with the same interpretation and the same application, if you like, as much as possible.
Okay. And you're confident that we've got good alignment to meet these dates of July and August?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Stafford, did you want to just answer that from the wider HUGS context?
Yeah, thank you, Blair. So from a HUGS context, it's really important that this engagement happens and is successful. We can't be successful to grow the city by ourselves. We've been talking about the financial constraints we have, and the only way forward is to partner successfully with all of our stakeholders and those government agencies with some conflicting points of view sometimes are really important in this space. So what I am signaling through this report is it's really important that we articulate this balancing act that we're trying to achieve. We have the evidence basis to support a position that we're in, and we go and have proactive conversations with these government agencies to make sure that their interests are reflected through the document as much as we can accommodate them.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add a little bit to that as well, and that in terms of working together with these agencies and with our neighbouring partners, so through the future-proof work streams, we are all working together quite well to deliver stuff. I guess, and that supports alignment through these projects.
Okay, thank you very much. And
Thanks,
one
Rob.
question unrelated to the HUG's review update, and that's on the Embassy Park Sappermore Jones work. My recollection is we've allocated in the LTP around $6 million to do the upgrade and repair work for Embassy Park and Sappermore Jones. How is that to be? How is that going? And given, excuse me, given that the theatre build is now underway, how is that going to be reported back to council in terms of the progress and that particular budget spend?
Thank you, Councillor Rob. I think Tilly Murcott from the line there, you might want to pick that one up.
Thanks, Tilly.
Morena. Hi, we are planning to bring an update on that and the high-level scope and approach to the next Central City River Plan Advisory Group meeting on the 8th of March.
Okay, how does that get to council? Is that reported back?
Yeah, so what we're proposing is for a recommendation to be endorsed by the Central City River Plan Advisory Group, and then that will flow through to the appropriate committee. So that will likely either be transport or so infrastructure ops or community, likely community committee since it's Embassy Park, but we can find and iron out those details at CCRP.
So will it be reported to a number of different committees, will it?
Well, no, it's a matter of what I heard Tilly say is a matter of deciding which of those two were the right one for the Central City Embassy Park one to go to.
Okay, okay. Yes. So the answer is watch the space. And
it'll be one of those two, but straight in the round straight after your Central City Advisory Group meeting in March, Tilly?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, there's two components to it, given that we've got the Embassy Park element and the Sappermore. So because there's a transport and a community element, it's just a matter of deciding what is the most appropriate committee. But yeah, we are going to outline what the high-level approach and timeline and what your involvement will be as well throughout the process, and give you a proper good update then.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Mark 1.
Can I just, Zoom. Before we take Mark, just Councillor Rob, you know your earlier questions, which were great questions. I think for me, what I would just say is that what we're going through at the moment with all our future-proof district plan HUGs, once we enable or we make plan changes, they have a very long-term implication, and so it's really important to me and to our team that one, we meet the statutory deadlines, but equally we do it right. And so that's the reason why we've slowed HUGs down a couple of times. We've slowed down future-proof. These decisions have implications for decades ahead, and so I want this council to be really comfortable with how the various parts fit together. And so my single major focus is to deliver what we need to deliver before this term is out, but equally noting that the district plan is effectively notified for consultation. HUGs would be up for consultation. Future-proof will be finalised, but there will still be processes that will play out post this triennium. These are really, really important matters, and we've got to try and bring as much information as late as possible to the table to enable us to make the best informed decisions. So, and I guess you could say, helpfully or unhelpfully, there has been some rather significant changes that have come in late in the piece, and the legislation, RMA changes pre-Christmas, has been a substantial impact on our work program. So we've had to take the time to step back and think about it.
The questions weren't intended to be a criticism.
No.
What staff are doing, it really is just a matter of getting some confidence around the fact that our direction is in a straight line, and that we will.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think for me, that's what I'm trying to.
No, thank you for that.
Okay, Mark now, thanks.
Thanks, Chairman Mack. Kind of extending along the line that Rob was talking about with that straight line, and it's something to do with something you said, Karen, at the very beginning, so I'd like to address my question to you, if I could. You're talking about these being extraordinary times, And I'm cognizant of the fact that, I don't know, for example, micro-mobility is a term we've only used for the last 3 years. When we first started in council 2 terms ago here, there was bikes, buses and cars, and that was pretty much it. Now there's scooters and skateboards, and we're taking them seriously, etc. The first part of my question is, what is HUGS or the Growth Group doing to constantly challenge their own thinking and keep an eye on world trends with regards to our planning without compromising our planning? Does that make sense?
I think there's a couple of people who might be able to help answer this question, Mark. And that would be Mark Davey from a sort of strategic planning sense and what we can put in place in terms of structure plans to support planning for good communities and incorporating those things that you mentioned. And then there's the long-term thinking, which Phil Hazeldine is leading around that. And I'm sure that Phil has been looking at those trends and anything that Phil's working on, anything that Mark's team is working on, that thinking is into our growth strategy. So I might just pass it across to Mark first to talk about the planning aspect.
Cool, thanks Karen, thanks Councillor Bunting. Look, I think it comes back to my point earlier in a very broad sense, and that is where Hamilton's transitioning from a relatively low density city to a high density or higher density city, right? So that challenges us to start to think differently as to how we plan things like micro mobility that you've mentioned, things like the green policies that Mayor Paula was just picking up on, are all things we need to start weaving into our planning framework so that these urban environments are good places to live, and that our urban streetscapes and such respond to the high density of living that we're about to, or that we're starting to enable. So I think that.
Yeah, I guess the question is like Karen was talking about these being extraordinary times. I mean, COVID has knocked us around, and this ain't going to be as temporary as we think it's going to be. So I'm thinking, for example, with mass transit. Mass anything is becoming a social problem or social issue at the moment. And, are we so stuck in our ways with, the existing ways of doing mass transit? Are we nimble enough to maybe look at the next opportunity?
I think,
and I guess to follow on that is, what have you seen worldwide with urban cities with regards to mass transit?
I might pass over to Phil to answer that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think on the basis that we're all transport nerds inside, we do keep an eye on future trends and what other cities are doing. If I use the Metro Spatial Plan as an example, when we actually get to the position where we discuss programs and way forwards with you, we will be talking about what other cities have done as examples of what we're proposing. A really good one is Seville, actually, in Spain, in terms of the way that they've had a colossal increase in micromobility patronage over 3 years. So we're sort of going to come to you with examples around that. But I would say as well, some of the best new ideas are actually old ideas, and the way forward is just
penny farthing bicycles.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. It's just doing public transport really well. It's great facilities, great frequency. Going back to what Councillor Sarah was talking about earlier, it's just getting those facilities in the right place, doing the right things, and joined up as part of networks. And getting them as lead infrastructure, so having those conversations up front. So innovation is often, I think, the way we practice old ideas, and there's a spatial component to that as well, which again is some tough conversations I think we're going to be having as part of this whole growth jigsaw about the reallocation of road space and the way we're going to have to reuse some existing infrastructure.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm wanting to hear from you is, how willing are we to button on and button off? Because, it's all very well to put in bus lanes and stuff like that, and I don't necessarily disagree. But if people aren't going to use them because they're too afraid to sit next to somebody, is it as efficient, and can we button on, button off without having to do major shifts in our thinking?
we're going to have a balanced approach of those big, grand infrastructure proposals that we're going to be talking about in the MSP space with just doing the basic stuff better. And if that means we have to have a conversation around the level of quality of bus services and vehicles and where people sit, then that's part of it.
Yeah, okay. No, that's cool. Thanks. I appreciate that because I know it's flying a bit wide of the line there, so thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Gallagher, please.
You may rule me out of order. Maybe out of
Can
scope.
I do it preemptively?
Yeah. Item 14, staff are currently planning a growth tour for members to visit greenfield growth areas and some infill areas to support the HUGs and district plan review work. Now, obviously, as I previously did, I acknowledge the incredible intellectual grunt, and I honour that. When we talk infill, and as you know, I hate that word with a passion because it doesn't say community, it doesn't say social justice. Who is actually organising the tour?
Yeah, Councillor Gallagher, I put that point in just for you, and I'm very sorry that I used the word infill. That is noted for the future.
Oh.
So my team is organising that tour, and we're currently navigating the red traffic light system and how we can get people on
Sure.
bus.
No. Well, keep the word infill because that is a descriptive our approach at the moment, and I'm not. This is a mutual observation. You'll be liaising obviously with the Minister Ryan Hamilton. Because basically, I want to put you to a walking tour as well, and I'm just wanting to look at some of the micro. Just bear with me, the micro retrofit. So we've been discussing things high level, right? And I'll just give you an example, and then I'll shut up. I lost a dear friend, Christine Cave. She lived in Manning Street, right? So for various reasons, I've had occasion to spend time in Manning Street, which technically I think is a 50k zone, but you couldn't, and it's full of parked cars. It's a density. So I'm looking at places like that, Beatty Street, Cameron Road, which are high densities, and how we are now with the so-called infill. These are examples of infill, and there's some good examples of design and not so good. But how we sort of, with the Eva Leases of this world and the Robin Dentons of this world, how are we doing the sort of the micro work, so we've got the higher level, but it's like now, how are we going in to those areas and getting the things like the street lights, the parking sorted, the road speed sorted? We are already talking of infill areas. And we can wax lyrical with respect about international examples, the beautiful places overseas, but in our city right now, we have infill areas where I'm actually arguing I think the quality of life of people who live in these high density areas to a degree compromised with some just basic stuff. I'm trying to be as concise as I can, but get out of the bus and get on the feet. Walk. You don't even need to wear a mask if you're distance. Let's do walking tours. And I'm being constructive, Karen. Can you see where I'm going on this?
Yes, I understand, Councillor Martin, and that is something that we'll arrange in the near future, and it ties in a lot into HUG's years, and very much so. It also ties into the work that Mark's leading through the district plan.
Because what I'm trying to do now in terms of our AP or the next LTP is work out where we take a geographic approach to certain designated areas to retrofit some extra facilities because they are high density already. The 20 minutes that exist for those people, but they have potholes, 50k zones, unsafe streets, bad street lighting, etc., etc. So I just want to make that point if we can have part of this tour. Could we also, through the chair, are we going to have someone from the design panel?
Sorry, you're straying.
Sorry.
No, let me finish. You're straying into stuff that will be really usefully brought up at the Infrastructure Committee
Okay.
and the annual plan, as you talked about, whereas some of the stuff is the growth and strategic future development area. So you're wanting to make sure that we don't forget about the short term and the existing part, city, which is totally justifiable. But apart from the central city, these are growth areas.
Sure. So where the growth has dramatically happened, what we're doing for retrofit, so-called.
Yeah.
But in terms of the new areas, greenfields as well, are we looking at someone from the design panel perhaps coming with us too? Because I think there's, again, if you're looking at some amazing expertise, both within our staff and our external, just to sort of share perspectives with us as well on this tour.
You mean that our council urban design?
Yes.
Yeah, we had that arranged.
I mean, because our esteemed chair has a vision of a city of 500,000 people, you know, Dresden, Leipzig, whatever. Would I suggest it would be time for the design, you know, the big picture thinking. I just want to make sure we've got the people around us, internally, externally, who are going to share stuff with us. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Mark 2.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not 100% sure if I've got a question or a little bit of debate. So forgive me, just tell me if I'm out of line. But
as long as it's not ute parking again.
It's not ute. It's got nothing to do with utes. No, that's a topic for another day when we widen car parks in town and all that sort of thing. But actually, Bunty brought up quite a bit of stuff which talked to some of the things I was going to talk about as well. And it's he touched on. You know, my question was, where's our thinking around how we're not only going to concentrate on moving people around the city, but also the commercial aspect of the movement. You know, we've got the Ruakura Super Hub coming in, and you know, we've got stats coming at us that are saying, you know, I was talking to Blair and the others in the break about New Zealand Post moved in excess of 2.2 million parcels just last week. You know, that's across New Zealand, but you know, being one of the biggest metro growth areas, a lot of that's going to be coming from Hamilton. So I see where, you know, we've touched on the fact we're following we're watching world trends, but what's the assurance that, or what's going to give us the confidence that we are supporting the business side of our urban growth development as well? What is that? Am I on target with that? Because the other thing I was going to say was there's old ideas and there's new ideas, and then there's sometimes a guy like me who has no idea. Who's the deer with no eyes, I meant to say. Yeah.
So, Councillor Mark 2?
Yeah.
Thank you. Stafford, you might want to just talk about the work that's happening with the industrial land, and which HUGS is also picking up on.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so through the HUGS work, we're not only looking at capacity and supply of housing for Hamilton growth, it's also about that non-residential side. So it's about retail, commercial and industrial growth for our city. So alongside looking at that through HUGS, there's also a relationship group with industrial landowners who we're discussing some of these issues with. So rest assured that we are looking at this non-residential side of the city growth for Hamilton.
Thanks.
I think, Stafford, the other sort of aspect to Councillor Mark's comment was when we're thinking about movement around the city, it's not just movement of people and cars, it's the freight, it's the logistics, it is the business side of the economy and the transport systems that may be needed to enable and support that. So Hamilton's, you know, for example, Mark's perspective, and we see that Hamilton's increasing role in logistics and freight and inland ports. We need transport systems that enable and support that.
Yep.
So it's not just all about reduction of vehicle kilometres travelled for residential, it's actually also about enabling freight, and our role as an increasing key part of the Upper North Island sort of economy. So I guess, Stafford, that was the additional point that Councillor Mark was sort of looking for, confidence that HUGS and I guess through district plan others would be thinking about.
Yep. That was it. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, councillors, look, Ryan's moved the resolution on page 14, seconded by Ewan, that we receive the report. Ryan, do you want to speak to that? Okay. There's been a lot of speaking in the questions and Ewan doesn't. So Councillor Gallagher does. So far away, Martin, thanks.
No, I mean, notwithstanding my collective frustration in terms of how we identify appropriate projects through the AP and the LTP to, if you like, urgently retrofit parts of the city where high density has already arrived significantly, you know, and what I was saying is some basic stuff like the Cameron Roads, the Manning Streets, the Beatty Streets, you know, what does good street lighting look like? What does basic footpath paving look like? Parking, access to green spaces and that kind of thing. So I think it's really important that we kind of have the one-stop shop, and I think the intent of the tour, which is excellent, thank you very much. Obviously you'll be liaising with Councillor Hamilton Ryan on that to design that tour, and if we're at red alert system, then I'm not without shame get 2 buses, because to do the spread or whatever, and we get out, we'll walk around, because this is urgent stuff, you know, because obviously there's significant growth, and I do want to commend, as I said before, I think we're at a point in the cities where there's huge intellectual grunt in this building, and with other groups like the Design Panel, Property Council, other groups as well, and I'm just wanting to work with those. But I think with respect, there's a sense of urgency in some parts of our city, significant urgency in terms of what is the quality of life for the young child who lives in a very high density apartment dwelling in Manning Street, Beatty Street, Cameron Road. What does their life look like? And we're correctly applauding the incredible initiative in Rotorua, but I want the quality of life in the areas I've mentioned to have equality with the Rotorunas of this world. So I think we've got some, with respect, through our budgeting system, through the next LTP, we've got some urgent, if you like, retrofitting to do to bring our urban amenity up to par. Then the second issue is, and again it was building off the Chair's report, I absolutely acknowledge the really good, innovative, positive, forward thinking we're doing with the Greenfields area. And, you know, Peacocks, I think, is a good example of where we are evolving some really good urban landscapes, urban, you know, and so don't get me wrong, I think we're doing some really amazing, innovative stuff, and I'm excited by that. But I think we've got to really, again, as I said before, I'm just anxious and give urgency to some parts of our city which need absolute attention now, for whom this high growth has already arrived.
Thanks. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you. I really just wanted to back up Councillor Martin's comments there. I think that doing some fantastic work looking forward in terms of areas where, you know, there's a lot of capacity for more intensification. We already, and how we're going to create great communities there, we already have places with high density living, and our infrastructure has not kept up with that in terms of that amenity, things that, like Martin said, bring quality of life. So I would really like to understand, as we go into this annual plan, whether we need more resourcing to do the planning work for the long-term plan, how we actually get from here to being at a point at the long-term plan where we can consider a proposal for retrofitting some of these areas, or at least be able to understand how we can use some of our existing programs like public transport and biking and micro-mobility projects to enhance these areas. I think it is really critical, and we owe it to our residents to ensure that equity across the city. And so it's something that I'm keen to really focus on for that next LTP. Thanks.
Thanks. Just before Ryan's right reply, I'll say a couple of words that I'm really looking forward to the current and former deputy chairs of the infrastructure concerns in that committee to get some traction there with that general manager and those units and ensure that through that committee we get some input into this year's annual plan and LTP, because I don't mind them being part of hijacking, of using discussions in the Strategic Growth Committee, but, immediate things. That's why we set up the Infrastructure Operations Committee, to get some of those things like the road, the streetscape upgrades and things like that. That's where there are homes for that, and they've got a unique position in that committee structure. Thank you. Sorry, what do you... Oh, Bunty. Sorry, there's a very black Bunty up there.
Oh, hang on.
No, Bunty.
Yeah,
you've had your turn.
There we go. Hello. Yeah, sorry to. Yeah, I wasn't really nodding off. My camera just decided to stop for some reason. Hey, look, I just want to say thank you for. It really is. I love these reports. They're really, really good. And I was delighted to hear. I think it was you, Karen, saying you've got a person thinking 10 years ahead, and you've got another person thinking 50 years ahead. And it's always going to be the challenge with these things, especially when you're trying to activate the MPSUD, the DPC, the MDRS, FP, any other acronym you can throw at it. Man, navigating that must be a hell of a challenge. But I would urge you to keep your eye on world trends as to the way things are going, and don't be afraid, all of us, to challenge our own ideologies when it comes to transport in particular and urban design. But thank you. I appreciate you trying to build a city not only for tomorrow but for the day after tomorrow. It's always going to be a challenge. But yeah, I'd encourage us to stay nimble, stay on our toes, and be ready to take turns. Thank you.
Thanks. Ryan, to close the debate.
Just a wrap-up comment that was triggered by Councillor Martin on urban design. You all recall the very clumsy and arrogant MDRS bill which has been thrust upon us and cuts through our ability to use urban design. I have asked staff to look at what incentives we can use with development to proactively do it, but the right to do it now has been taken and stripped away from us. So we'll be exploring all the levers we can to incentivise those good urban design outcomes.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call for those in favour to raise their hands. Thanks. Against? It's carried unanimously. Thanks. Okay, councillors, we're going to move along because we're going to be finishing before lunch. Development contributions Q1 report, which I guess is up till the end of September.
Yes, the team are online for that through the chair, but I'm wondering whether we just take questions on this. It's largely an information report.
Okay.
I'll move the report.
So it's been moved, and I'll second that. Thanks. That's on page 49. So are there questions from councillors about this? This is just reporting to us for information. If there are no questions, I'll put the resolution. Those in favour raise their hands. Against? That's carried. Thanks very much. We're on to the General Manager's report, and Jeff will come to your questions after Blair's introduced it.
Thank you, Councillor Dave. The report actually covers quite an extensive range of topics today, and just noticed Phil has just left the room, so there is quite a substantial piece in the General Manager's report on the metro transport works. So
I've checked that Chris is able to fill it if Phil isn't here on the Metro Spatial Plan Transport. Yeah. I'd already checked that in advance. So I'm surprised you didn't tie Phil down, Chris.
Yeah, so look, we're just noting that there's a broad range of topics, much of which we've canvassed today. Happy to take questions. One of the ones that is worth just noting is later on in an attachment 2, you'll see Mayor Paula received a letter from Minister Megan Woods around our request for the Peacock HIF to IF, and I understand that that particular meeting the letter refers to is occurring within the next week. So Treasury officials have provided briefing papers, which is encouraging. So we haven't seen the form of those, but I think it's a positive sign that that particular conversation may be progressing. Obviously, we are also working with Kāinga Ora on the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund bids. There's been some subsequent questions which Greg Carstens and the team have been responding to there. And also the Strategic Developer Forum, there has been some meetings with Kelvin Eglinton, who's facilitating that from the developer side, working towards a future meeting. So, look, I might just leave it there and open up for questions on the various range of topics. And in perfect timing, Phil's just come back into the room as well.
And yeah, just before I go to Jeff, this is questions only because these reports are for information. We won't be debating the subjects as such. If we need to, we'll set that up for a later date. But Jeff, you're first.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Yeah, first question was just about bottom of page 55, the Metro Spatial Plan transport business case, and it kind of touches on what Bunty was talking about a little bit earlier in terms of PT in particular. We're obviously getting to the stage where some of the Metro Spatial thinking on transport starts to turn into recommended projects for councils to consider. And I'm looking at point 36 where it talks about introducing new bus services, increased frequency, fast priority parking management. And point 42 where it talks about continued promotion of road space reallocation. So I've got no issue with references to active modes. In fact, I think that's going to explode in future years. I'm not quite so convinced about the scale of public transport being suggested. And I guess in relation to COVID, patronage has dropped in the last couple of years and the amount of subsidy needed has gone up. And also the days of people sitting close together may be over for some years. So I guess what I want to know is, are we factoring any of this into our metrospatial planning on transport? What is PT costing us annually now compared to 2 years ago? Is there a recognition that bus usage has declined? And is any of this being considered in our metrospatial plans, transport planning?
Phil Hazeldine is going to initially respond. Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of, I guess, the patronage effects of COVID on public transport, I guess my response is in two answers. One, the programme business case is still pretty broad from a data sense, so there is some flexibility in there to sort of cater within our technical analysis for some fairly broad changes of patronage. But saying that, we kind of did predict where this was going, and I think we have slowed some of our PT growth rates, again, in terms of some of our transport modelling, which is informing our evidence base. So in simple terms, yes, we have, to a broad level, befitting a broad project of this nature. I guess at the same time, this is unashamedly a PT, particularly rapid transit focused study. The transformational benefits of passenger transport, I guess, are well documented. They form the fabric of most cities around the world. So we are developing our work on that basis. So if anything, maybe our rates are going to be a bit slower, but we're certainly not diluting the extent of the schemes and recommendations we're looking at because of COVID.
I guess the other aspect of Jeff's question, if I could, Jeff, was just he's positing that there may be the proposed sort of uptake of micro mobility might be still quite fast, even I think he used the word potentially exploding, or Bunty did, as opposed to buses, especially being slower. So is that something that's been catered into this as well?
Sorry, was that the uptake of bus? Sorry, I'm struggling to...
Jeff, you have a go.
The uptake of the uptake of micro-mobility absolutely explode is the word I would use, Dave, and you know, that's exciting, and hopefully we're catering for that. But also the PT, as you say, the PT decline, yeah. I'm not convinced from your answer, Phil, that that's really being recognised. Just PT feels like it's so embedded in the metrospatial plan that there's not a lot of room to move.
Well, I think the COVID-related decline of patronage is being reversed. You are seeing those numbers coming back up. So I think I don't think passenger transport, or the need for passenger transport from a metro spatial plan context when we're looking decades ahead is dissipating. So I don't feel that we need to.
Okay. But Jeff, sorry, could I just interrupt a little bit there, because I think there's a way through that that can take account of the data as it comes in. My understanding, Phil, is that anything coming up in the public transport area from the Metro Spatial Plan transport study is going to be, when it grows or when it morphs into mass transit or more faster, more frequent services, depends to a large extent on the uptake and trigger points set by that. So it's not dates being set so much as when the growth requires a new step sort of thing, which could be shorter or longer depending on the prevailing conditions.
Absolutely right, yes. Yes, so if you refer to the sequencing diagrams that excuse me, we've seen in this paper and in some of the past briefings, it does talk about, you know, we're not going to have rapid transit overnight, so you're going to be looking at increases of frequencies along key corridors that might be the first decade worth of work. You might do some implementation of further bus priority, better PT facilities, and maybe your 20-year aspiration would be that dedicated right-of-way, that North Shore, Auckland North Shore busway type facility. So yes, staged and sometimes over decades.
So Jeff, it wouldn't happen in a programmed way. It would depend on the need being demonstratable.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Thanks for that, Dave. I guess I'm just mindful that in our annual plan we've got some significant costs for PT infrastructure coming up. I would very much like, Phil, if we could get some information in front of us in terms of patronage over the last couple of years and the ensuing subsidisation that has been needed, like how much are residents now subsidising our PT. Before I make any decisions in the annual plan, I would really like, as a governor, some better information on that. But thanks for that.
Jeff, was there another line of questioning you had as well?
There was something just about the Southern Links, Dave.
Yeah, do you want to ask that now too?
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to get a feel for that dreaded study that NZTA wants to do, the form and function study of it. I didn't see an indication of how long that might take. And a second part of that question is, how much input can we as a council have into that to ensure that some sensible outcomes are arrived at?
If I can pick that one up, Councillor Jeff. Yep, look, I'll be right on top of that one and just trying to get information from Waka Kotahi at the moment. So our intent is to be fully embedded in the project. My understanding is they're just looking to secure some funding, but it's a project that will go over the next sort of 3 to 6 months, so relatively short duration. And it's intended really to, the Southern Links has been in the planning for a long time, designated, 5+ years ago. It's just to test its form and function with the current land use patterns, current thinking on transport, etc., etc. So it's a really positive move to do this thinking, and we'll be right there, intending to be right there at the front row with Waka Kotahi.
Well, Chris, sorry if I could just interrupt again, Jeff. Before we even get to the front row, we have our own group that's been set up to sort of scope and push along this work. I think that that needs to meet quite soon so that we can decide whether we're pushing it and Kotahi's just in the front row, or the way you've put it, which is the other way around, because I would hate us to be in a position of waiting for them before we sort of say what we think should be happening. I don't know whether that's where you're coming from, Jeff, but I know that we actually decided to set up that group.
Look, I agree with that, Councillor Dave, and like paragraph 90 will report back to the Southern Links Working Group with a proposed terms of reference for the form and function. So I'll pick up your point. It's probably not presenting terms of reference, but working on the terms of reference with you.
Yeah, we decide, we give them the terms of reference, I think, as far as we're concerned. Will obviously be discussion and negotiation will have to take place, but we certainly don't wait for them to come up with something for us to peruse.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, that's very much where I was going. Chris, you tried to allay my fears, but you mentioned that current transport thinking would be a part of it, and that immediately worries me, because I always think of whose thinking are we talking about, whose current thinking, because it seems to me there's some quite rarefied kind of thinking going on in the metrospatial plan, which is not necessarily been socialised with the public, or not something that they would even agree with. So I do worry when we start talking about current thinking, because it tends to, often I find it's pointy-headed thinking. Anyway, thank you.
Noted.
I'm checking whether Chris's head's looking pointy at the moment. Okay, thanks. Ryan, please.
Thanks, Chair. Look, my questions flow on 100% from yours and Jeff's. Was two parts. One, clarifying that we're not going out with our bigger bowl waiting for NZTA to come to us, and we're actually going to the table and say, where the F is it? And also that it's not just, they've indicated that they will include council in the review, but this working group we've established is to include other externals, other councils, chambers of commerce, etc., etc., etc. So it'd be good to have an update on that, because part of the role of advocating is advocating for them to hurry up with this stuff in the first place.
So, Chris, I think you're getting the message.
Yep. Look, I'll pick that up and probably by email give elected members an update in the next couple of days.
Yeah. And maybe if we grab a date to convene a meeting of our group, and we look at inviting the others along anyway to scope that out, because it's part of it was getting the old advocacy we used to have for Southern Links back on the front burner. It's been on the back burner for a while for lots of reasons, and we need to get on if we don't get on the front burner, no one else is going to. Waka Kotahi might take years, not months.
If I could helpfully suggest, or maybe I'll ask a question, perhaps, Chris, would you be able to supply a list of potential members like local MPs and other advocates, power advocates, that we could lean on to help? Would that be possible?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'll nominate Councillor Ryan to work with Chris on getting that list together.
No worries.
Jeff, did you have any more on the Southern Links thing, or is that? Okay, and Ryan, are you right? Okay, councillors, that's the last question I've got listed, for that. So I will move that the GM's report be received, seconded by Ryan. Those in favour raise their hands. Those against, thank you. So, councillors, I'll move to item 10, which is the motion to exclude the public. I'll move that. Ryan seconded. Those in favour raise their hands. Against, that's carried. So, councillors, we'll just wait for